All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. We're happy to have you here at the Gaslamp Quarter Historical Foundation's History Talks. Today, we're going on the road to Columbia, which is an old gold rush town up northern California. And tonight, we have Randy and Amber, who are with California State Parks, and they are going to tell us all about the town.
Yes, I guess I'll go ahead and begin now. So I'm sorry for my look. It looks a little extreme. We're getting some rain here. We got a downpour today. It's about 40 degrees, so it's pretty cold. My name is Randy. I work for California State Parks, and you're joining us here today at Columbia State Historic Park. I'm going to pull up on a map to give you an idea of where I am. So I have this image of Columbia. So let me pull it up for you right now. So you can see it on your map, it's highlighted. And so Columbia State Historic Park is situated right in the center of an area we refer to as the Mother Lode. So this is an area that during the 1850s was flooded with people from all over the world in search of gold. And so there were many different gold rush towns, different mining towns. Well, Columbia has the distinction of being the largest collection of preserved gold rush buildings. And a lot of those gold rush towns, they either no longer exist, they've been modernized, or they only have a few buildings. Well, Columbia has over 30 gold rush buildings. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And even though it is very dark, I'll turn my camera so you can see some of these. Let me get a little bit closer over here. I'll show a light, a pretty strong flashlight, to just give you an overview. So Columbia was once a very large town with a population of around 15,000 people in the early 1850s. It had over 150 businesses. And now we're lucky enough to have about 30 of these businesses. And each one of these buildings tells their own story and helps to highlight the challenges faced by miners and merchants of that era. I'm going to share with you a photo of Columbia in its prime, you could say. So let me go ahead and find, my screen probably turned, that's all right. So I'll show you here a couple old photos of Columbia that I have. So here's a picture of a large mining operation that was located just across the street from where I'm standing now. You can see some of the old brick buildings and wooden buildings in the backdrop. Another photo I have is of this building, the Wells Fargo, that we're going to go ahead and go into. This building was built in the late 1850s. This photo was taken in the late 1850s as well. So it gives you an idea of what town looked like. Here's another photo that I have, and you can see all the buildings. So town was very, very large. Most of those buildings were torn down or destroyed due to fire. You can see this couple posing in front of their house. So now let's go ahead and enter on into the Wells Fargo. That'll be our first stop today. So we'll make our way inside. This building dates back to the late 1850s, and it was preserved in part due to the Wells Fargo actually donating money to its preservation. So we'll go inside so you can see this preserved Wells Fargo Express office. So these Wells Fargos, they were kind of a central hub in town. So they were used as a bank. They were used as a post office. They were also where miners would go and turn in their gold and get their gold. So there would be to gold, tells its own story, and you can see some of the lettering here. The lettering was actually uncovered during the building's preservation during the 1940s. In the back of the building, have a parlor. This parlor was, first it was used by our first Wells Fargo agent, a man by the name of William Dagner, and he lived here with his wife, and he immigrated from Prussia. And so this building, this room that I'm standing in, room, and then upstairs were the family's bedrooms. Their kitchen was outside, so there was on into the office where there'd be long lines of townspeople. It's reported that the lines would stretch around the block. And they'd come up here to check and see if they had any mail dropped off by the stagecoach, and also to get their gold weighed. So the Wells Fargo is really important to our story. It's kind of our most iconic building out of our entire collection of old buildings. And so it was preserved. Well, town was preserved as a state park in 1945. And so it was really preserved due to the townspeople caring about these buildings that were beginning to crumble. And so we're very fortunate that we still have this Wells Fargo here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and if you have any questions at all, please feel free to go ahead and ask them as we move to our next stops. And I'm actually going to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague Amber, who's going to talk to you about the Justice Court.
So good evening. My name is Amber and welcome to the Justice Court in Gold Rush, Columbia. This was a place where many people came to decide their fate. In the early part of the Gold Rush, they had what was called kind of mob mentality. They hadn't set up a rule of law. And so they had people of their peers deciding what the penalty would be if you broke the law. By the early 1850s, this town was really wealthy, and there were 15,000 people or so here, and they needed to figure out justice. So they used the alcalde system from the Spanish tradition to base their justice system off of. So they did have a judge, and they did have a lawyer and a jury system. Many people in Gold Rush, Columbia were not represented. So most Europeans were, but many other ethnicities were not. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit of story about one of the gentlemen and his fate here in the Gold Rush Justice Court. I saw that someone asked if people still live here, and this is a living and working town. So it's a place where there are a couple, like about 1,000 people that live in the boundaries of Columbia. Many of the businesses are owned or operated by concessions, and they live within the park. And then we also just have private residences. So it's always been a living town, and there's always been a population here. So I want to tell you the story of Stephen Spencer Hill. During the Gold Rush, what happened is they had a slave act, and California a free state. Most of that was due to the fact that people didn't want unfair competition in the mines. They didn't want to let people pay for other people to mine for them. So they would reenact the Fugitive Slave Act in 1852, and they would expand it, and they would make it so that you could be jailed for up to a month, and you would also be fined $1,000 if you helped someone escape to freedom. Stephen Spencer Hill came with his master here from Arkansas in 1852. By 1853, he had paid for his freedom. In 1854, his master went back to Arkansas because he was not striking it rich, and he'd become in super debt. But Stephen Spencer Hill stayed here, and he eked out enough money to buy a small piece of property about a mile from here. And then he found 9 ounces worth of gold. He had established a little farm, and that was printed in the newspaper. And from there, one of his slaveholders' friends, Mr. Hosier, figured out that Stephen Spencer Hill had become rich, and he came to claim him under the Fugitive Slave Act. Stephen Spencer Hill's neighbors would warn him, and he would run. The neighbors would get together and create a coffer of money to represent Stephen Spencer Hill with a lawyer. Mr. Hosier would find Stephen Spencer Hill, and he would arrest him under the Fugitive Slave Act. And he would bring him to court, and they would hold court here in Columbia, and they would decide that Stephen Spencer Hill had never bought his freedom. He could not prove it. Mr. Hosier would take him on stage down to Oakdale, and they would stay the night to get ready to go down to San Francisco and transport him back to Arkansas. In the middle of the night, Stephen Spencer Hill would escape with a pocket watch, a banknote for $500, and he was never to be heard of again. We believe that the banknote came from the gold that he found because his neighbors did go cash that into Wells Fargo and get a banknote. And it just kind of emphasizes how nothing is black and white in Gold Rush, California. That, you know, there were free people and there were also slaves here in Gold Rush, California. And it also showcases how when people work together, they can do the right thing. So in Gold Rush, California, justice was really important. And this justice court was actually used. I'm going to show you a little bit of our justice court, hopefully. Oh, I can't move my screen, so I'll do it this way. Our justice court was used until 1989. And many people got married here and divorced here. This was a circuit court. And this is a place that has fond memories for lots of the people of Columbia and the county. So thank you for joining us on this stop about justice in Gold Rush, California. And I'm going to pass you back to Randy.
All righty. Thank you. If you do have any more questions, you're welcome to ask them or type them in the chat. I just heard a giant roar of thunder right now. So we get all 4 seasons up here. And I wanted to share with you. So right now I'm standing not too far away from where Amber is, but I wanted to, it's dark, so it's hard to show you, you know, the remaining relics and buildings that we have from the Gold Rush, but you can see some of these brick buildings, this architecture right now that I'm shining my light on. I wanted to also share with you a photo of Columbia in the daytime. So here's what Columbia looks like. So I'm gonna make sure my screen turns. And you can see these images of a soaked Columbia, just like it is right now. And as Amber was mentioning, it is a living town. So we do have concessions. We have multiple programs throughout the year and school tours as well that unfortunately this year have gone virtual. In this next shot, you'll see here we have a shot of one of our 2 hotels. All right, someone said my light is good. I'm glad my light is good, but I can't get all the features of the building, unfortunately. So that's why I thought you needed to see some pictures in the daytime to fully do Columbia justice. So now I'm gonna go ahead and talk to you about this building that I'm standing in front of, this exhibit right here. So this, you're looking inside of what we call the Chinese store. And it's modeled to resemble a Chinese medicine shop or an herb shop. So Columbia had a very large population of Chinese miners and merchants who came here in search of gold. Some of those who didn't find gold, well, they would work in the different shops and would start their own businesses. So we had Chinese restaurants, we had Chinese laundry services. And this is an example of an herb shop. So you can see the altar used for praying in the background. Some of the items that would be for sale here, different types of teas brought over from China. If you look on this table, you might be able to see a turtle shell. There's some seahorses as well. Those would be grinded up and turned into powder, which would be digested, and that would be used to help relieve some pain. So Columbia, as I mentioned, had a large population of Chinese miners and merchants. We even had in Columbia, there once was a section, a Chinese section of town that's located just kind of outside of the main street left of buildings today. But that was known as the more cultural section of town. So it was the Chinese and the French section of town. And as I mentioned, the highest population in Columbia was around 15,000 people. So very, very high. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Amber again, who's going to talk to you about entertainment.
Welcome back. I'm in our bowling saloon, and tonight we're going to talk a little bit about entertainment during the Gold Rush. This was a place of mostly male miners. In fact, they say that in the 1850s, there was 1 male to every, and 100 males to every 1 female. This town supported over 60 saloons in the 1860s. They were gambling places, they were socializing events, and they were a place that people could kind of go after they worked 12 to 15 hours in the mines to escape that hard work and let loose. So gambling was a really popular pastime in the gold rush, and they gambled on everything. Bowling was not a child's game, but it was actually something that people would gamble on as well. So many people worked all day in the mines and struck it rich, and then would come to town and lose their fortune overnight in the streets and in the gambling halls. Gold rush miners and merchants had to be adventuresome. They came here not knowing about California, not understanding how wild it was, but willing to try and figure out how to get here. And once here, how to survive and make a living. Most people came with the idea that they were going to roll down the hills and gold would just stick to them, or that they would trip over a large nugget in the street and become rich overnight. Others came to change their fortune, to have opportunity. Here in Gold Rush, Columbia, women could own businesses, was very different than most of the rest of the United States at the time. And in many of our saloons, we would have what was called a pour girl. And the pour girl was someone who they would hire to attract people into the saloons. She would be the person that poured your drinks. And if you were lucky, she would charge you about $1,000 for a dance. The saloons never slept, and I'm gonna give you a chance to see a little bit more of the saloon. I'm gonna turn my camera around. So this is our bowling alley, and during regular times, we have events, and we also just have the bowling alley open for kids and the public to play. And one of the quotes that I really like from the Gold Rush about bowling is, "The rolling on the bowling alley never leaves off for 10 consecutive minutes at any time during the entire 24 hours. It is a favorite amusement at the mines, and the only difference that Sunday makes is that it never leaves off for 1 minute." And that's a quote from Louise Amelia Knapp, who came here in 1851 as one of the first pioneer women in the Feather River area. So this is a bowling alley. We actually had our volunteers construct it. It is the first known bowling alley that I know of. I know that now Old Town San Diego has one as well in our state park. So if you came to our bowling table, one cool thing about a lot of the stuff in here is we had our volunteers who for amazing historic researchers and props that would have been here in Gold Rush, Columbia, of a gaming table. And in Spanish decks, there are only 40 cards. By about 1853, the decks would have 52 cards in them. And gambling was a thing that was kind of, every gambling game had a cheating culture to it. So not only did the dealers cheat, but the players cheated. Oftentimes cheating in a very simple kind of way, by reading the deck, by putting a hair on the deck and making it so they could move the card, by making it so that they had different odds by changing the winners and losers. So one of the very popular games was called Fargo, and some of the other games there were all kinds of different games. One called Diana, and one called Cheating the Tiger, or Bucking the Tiger. So dealers cheated by secretly marking the cards. They manipulated the order of the cards, and they would use mirrors to see the order of the cards or other people's cards. So this was a place where lots of fights broke out, right? Because people were drinking as well. So this is our Redwood Bar, very similar to what it would look like in 1850 in Gold Rush, Columbia. Some of the bars were very ornate, where other ones were just tents and a couple of barrels. In the back of the bar, we have some cool items for sale. And we took the liberty of researching all of the Gold Rush alcohol from the area and then creating props so that people could see what labels look like, and that many of the alcohols in Gold Rush, California were produced in California and were specifically produced within a couple miles of here. One of the biggest breweries in Colombia was called the Columbia Brewery, of course, and it was owned by a German couple here in 1852. Their most popular beer was called dark beer, and it was a mix of 6 different beers together, all made of barley. People gambled with gold flakes, they gambled with real money later in time, and they would also gamble their mining claims. I'm gonna turn this back around, excuse me. So lastly, I wanted to leave you with this idea that this was a place of many cultures coming together. The saloon was kind of a place where everyone was equal. The quote I like best about thinking about nationalities here is it says, many nationalities contributed to the color and romance of the town. There were bullfights and fandangos from Mexico and Spain, music from Italy, gay dances from France, Sanger fests from Germany, Yankee wit matching Irish humor, Oriental mysticism, flickering against the vivid background of the Aboriginal abandon and superstition. The stage is set. The cast is chosen. On with the play. And the last thing I'm going to show you is just a few events that would have been happening here in 1850. This is our game wall. It just has a few boards of the different games that were here during the Gold Rush. So let me see. One last time, excuse me. Get you to so there we go. Sorry, I'm trying to get my face out of the way. So we have on the bulletin board, we would have had theaters here. We had 3 different theaters, and Casner's Exchange was our largest one. There are quotes of the miners following the playwrights into Sonora, which is about 4 miles from here, thousands of them cheering on the theater performers. We had bull and bear fights. We had a big bull and bear fight ring in the back of town. There's a kind of depiction of that. And we also had the circus here. So although people were here to strike it rich and go home, while they were here, they made the best out of town and the best out of entertainment. So with that, I'm gonna send you back to Randy, and she's gonna show you a little bit more about town.
All right, thank you, Amber. So I am standing, hold on, let me make my sister. I'm standing in front of one of our 2 hotels here. And let me get my flashlight a little bit brighter so you can see it. So this is the City Hotel. We also have a hotel here called the Fallon Hotel. Both of these hotels are running and operating hotels. So if you ever come to Columbia, you can actually spend the night in these historic buildings. This one is dates back to, I believe it's around the 1860s. It was rebuilt multiple times due to fire, and fire is a very important part of Columbia's story. Columbia actually burned down twice in huge fires, rebuilt using brick, and luckily enough, some of these brick buildings are still standing. So I'm going to go inside this hotel very briefly. This is going to be our second to last stop before we tell you more about Columbia's preservation as a state park. So let me go ahead and open this one for you. I don't think anyone's staying here, so maybe we'll have the full run of it to ourselves. But let me put down my umbrella because I don't want my umbrella up in a building. That is bad luck. So let's walk through, see some of this old hotel. You can see this hotel inside has a restaurant, which was typical for hotels. They would have restaurants inside. They would also have a bathtub as well for those who were fortunate enough to be able to stay in these hotels. For most people, they weren't able to afford hotels, so they would stay in boarding houses instead. So Columbia did have boarding houses as well, where you wouldn't necessarily get a room, you would get a blanket. And And you would have to sleep on a cot or the floor. And Raymond has a great question. Raymond is asking, are there any buildings that are haunted? Well, Raymond, we are standing in one that is supposedly haunted. And I'm going to go ahead and take you upstairs just so you can get an idea of what it's like to stay in these buildings. There are some ghostly legends, some urban legends that have been passed down over time in Columbia. Most of them have to do with the hotels. So now we're on the top floor. So there's different phantoms that have been seen by park staff, park docents, hotel guests as well. So it is a topic that we explore typically during October when we do have our paranormal tours of town. So that's the hotel. And over time, this hotel, I'll actually show you an old photo of one of these hotels. Let me go ahead and turn it. I'll show you both using these old photos. So this is the other one that we have in town, the Fallon Hotel. And through time, these hotels had many different uses. They were used as theaters. They could be used as, they'd have bars inside of them. They'd have dances inside of them. So here's the Fallon Hotel in a photo from the 1870s. And here's the hotel that I'm standing in right now. This picture was taken in the 1930s, before town became a state park. I apologize if it's very small on your screen. But throughout time, these hotels and these buildings have all changed hands, and they've had many different types of uses before. So I'm gonna go ahead, and I don't like really being in here since I know the ghost stories. Makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm gonna go back onto the main street, and I will open it up to Amber to begin our final topic of this tour of Columbia by talking about preservation. And Amber, if you need me to share any photos, I can do that from my screen.
Yeah, if you want to, in a minute, you can show them Rose Wilson.
Okay.
I'm going to try and show them the Wilson house. This town was preserved and protected by the community, by state parks, and by a few special people. One of the prominent people was Geraldine McConnell and her husband. But before we talk about them, I wanted to give you a chance. This is their house, and they bought this house in the 1940s. I'm sorry, it's very dark, so you may not be able to. She'll share her screen in a minute. But the Wilson house is a place that has a neat story in that Miss Rose Wilson came here at 14 to Amador City. And she was an Italian immigrant, and she married and had 4 kids. Her husband would go missing and would never be seen again. And 2 years later, she would marry James Wilson. James Wilson and Rose would have 6 more children. They would run a leather shop. And today we actually have a leather shop here that kind of showcases their business. But they had this big, successful leather shop. And from there, they wound up trying to build their dream home. So this is their dream home behind me, and Randy's going to show a picture of it in a minute, or her flashlight will help us maybe. Sorry, very dark. All right, that's better. So this is McConnell House. Maybe I'll walk away from you and you can give them the shot of that. There we go. So Miss McConnell and Miss Wilson both lived here. Miss Wilson's husband, as we were speaking about, she would have a husband named James. They would have a leather shop, and unfortunately, he would pass away before this house was built. Miss Rose Wilson would take on her business, raise her 9 children, and build this dream home. I'll go away from you. She's an example of Columbia. Am I unfrozen? Okay. So then Miss McConnell and her husband James came here in the 1940s, and everything was kind of falling down, but there was still these beautiful historic buildings that were worth preserving. And this was a community effort. They tried 3 times to preserve this park. And every time there would be a war, there would be something that kept them from doing it. And so they would eventually be successful. They would create a preservation society. And in 1945, they were friends with Governor Earl Warren. And they were able to successfully get him to pass legislation that said if they could create a stipend of about $10,000, that the California State Parks in California would match it. So this park was really an example of the success of a community getting together, the state caring about a place that tells the history of our gold rush and the changes that the gold rush brought to the culture, economy, and landscape of California. And they preserved this place because it's the largest placer mine in California. They took out $86 million worth of gold in 1860s prices, or almost $10 billion today. So this was a wealthy place. The gold boomed here, and within about 15 years, they would find only small pockets and people would move on. But as we spoke about, this was a living town. So this living town is pretty cool because when they set it aside, they realized they needed to keep the people here and keep like economies going. And so they created this ability for a lot of people to have small businesses within our park. So we have people that are called concessions that run most of our stage operation, candle dipping, leather store, candy shop. And many of those people have been here for generations, and they pay a small amount of rent. And exchange, what they do is they dress in historic costume and they help people feel like they've stepped back in time and are immersed in history. We also have about 150 volunteers that do about 18 events a year. And we're really proud that we get to serve our California students and people from around the world. So here in the streets of Columbia, we have an old school house, and we do tours of town, and we provide that for about 60,000 school kids a year. And then with our events combined, we're at about almost 100,000 kids. And with COVID, of course, things have changed, but we're still programming virtually to a lot of those people. And I'm gonna throw you back to Randy, who's our main programmer for that. And she's gonna give you a little bit more on the rest of town.
Mute. Whoops. So I'm standing at one end of the street here. Just wanted to give you a shot of one of our old, our virtual tours are free for students. Yeah, great question. So here's one of our old firehouses. And then down over here at the corner, as Amber was mentioning, we have different concessionaires, and they will dress in period attire. We also have a blacksmith shop as well. Well, these two buildings at the corner, I just wanted to point them out to you really briefly before I wrap it up and open it up for a discussion. We have a grocery store here that's still a working grocery store. It was once a French grocery store. And we have another one of our saloons that's still standing and still is used as a saloon today. As I mentioned, yes, our virtual tours are free. We have been connecting with students and even senior groups all throughout the state. Can you send out your info, your web info for, yep, I can share with you the email that you can link up to teachers or different groups to join a virtual field trip of Columbia. I can definitely do that. All right. So, thank you. So are there any other questions before we sign off today? Oh, stay up.
And if you enjoyed the tour of town today, if you go to our website, there is a virtual tour of town where you can actually visit each building, you know, not from here, but to learn a little bit more about it. Randy's done a great job showcasing our schoolhouse and other historic buildings. And yes, there still is gold here in these hills. They say that only about 20% of the gold has been found. I think one of the things I never knew before working here was that you could be mining right next to someone else, and it really took luck. And so it really wasn't always about the mechanics or the tools you had. It was kind of about like luck of the draw, kind of like the lottery is. But people here still today do mine on the two different rivers. The Stanislaus River is about 1.5 miles from here, or 5 miles, depending on kind of where you go. And I've been told by the local miners that they can make between $30,000 and $60,000 a year on a normal year.
There was another question too, Amber, if you want to talk about mining from Bill.
I'm sorry, I'm not
Oh,
seeing
so-
the question, but yes, I'm happy.
Oh, okay, so Bill
Well,
wants
can
to
you say
know
his question?
about, yeah, he wants to know about the different types of mines. Was there any hard rock mining like up in Grass Valley?
Yeah, so this was a placer mine, meaning that the gold was broken up in small pieces and deposited within about 20 feet of the surface. So all of our town was generally hand dug, and they used rockers and gold pans first, and then they would go to larger hoist wheels like Randy showed. Just about 5 miles from here in Angels Camp, they did hard rock mining. And about 30 miles from here in Mariposa, same thing. So this is an ancient riverbed here in Colombia. And although it doesn't have year-round water, which was a challenge for them because they needed water to get the gold out, it is a place that had a large gold deposit that was shallow. Similar to Empire Mine, Angels Camp had a large mining district as well as Sonora, and those were all hard rock mines.
Someone had a great question about, you mentioned you have 18 events throughout the year. This is from Raymond. What are some examples? So some examples are, there are Back to School Night, which is an event that's held in our historic schoolhouse that we have here in town. We also have something called Lamplight, which is a Christmas event that takes place all throughout town, and it's a play that's acted out using the different buildings. It takes place at night. There's also our biggest event, which is our Diggins event, which occurs every May, and that serves thousands of students in a 2-day period. And also it's open to the public, and that's a recreation of what Columbia looked like in its early years. So it's a big tent town event that occurs just outside of the boundaries of town a little bit, but over there we have the different wooden structures set up to look like the early days of Columbia. That would be our biggest event. It's one of the largest interpretive costumes events in all of California state parks. Some other events that we have are, let me think, there's so many. There's different, like the Christmas parade. We have big band street dance during July to celebrate when Columbia became a state park. So that's every July 20th. Another question that we received is about, were there ethnic communities like the Cornish? Bill wants to know. Amber, can you speak to that?
Yeah, just if you're interested in some of our events, they're all listed online. And of course, right now, we're not doing them for COVID reasons, but we do have a lot of live streams on our Facebook page. So we do have one on Lamplight and Diggins. And if you were interested in some of those events, you could kind of take a peek that way. We also have a cool one in October called Stories and Stones up at our graveyard, talking about some of the different cultures. So so like in Mariposa and in Nevada City Grass Valley, they had a specific mining group that they targeted for hard rock mining because the Cornish already knew how to mine in small confined spaces. Here in the Gold Rush, people came, like the Southern Mines, which is what this is called, and we are specifically called the Gym of the Southern Mines in Colombia. The Southern Mines are they go from Jackson and down to Mariposa. They were the place where most cultures came, and it had to do just with like proximity to San Francisco and the ways in which people traveled. So the early people that came here that understood the geology that even allowed them to find gold were the Chilean and Hispanic people. And in Chile, they already had a gold rush. So they understood geology and strata, and they could figure out where gold might be. So this was California was part of Mexico. Within a couple of months of gold being discovered, it became, of course, California and no longer part of Mexico. But in the first year, there were, this town had about 6,000 people and 3,000 of them were Hispanic, mostly coming from Mexico, Chile, and Peru. There was the earliest people here of some ethnicity beyond the, of course, California Native Americans, which were the Miwoks, the Tuolumne Band of Miwok tribe, were the people from the Sandwich Islands in Hawaii. And they heard about gold really early. So they got here in 1848 and early 1849. But this town really was an ethnic center. One of the cool things about some of the other cultures that came is like the Chinese came and they found other things to do, but they were kind of not allowed to do a lot of the mines until they were mined out due to foreign miners tax. And then we had the French here in large numbers. The Italians really didn't come for the mines, they came for the climate. So in 1850 through 1855, people kind of came here as men thinking they're gonna strike it rich and go home. But by about 1855, people realized this was a place of opportunity. And so they brought their families from around the world. So, you know, over time, different cultural populations existed in large numbers here. And it really did change the communities around this area still today. Many of the generations are left here because they found this a great place to live and work.
So, you know, Amber, Bill said, since I don't think you're able to see, Bill said, fascinating, didn't know about the Chileans in California. But it makes sense.
Yeah. One of the other cool things is this was a dry diggings, meaning that like during the winter time, the Hildreth party finds gold here in 1850. They look across the canyon and they see 1,500 Hispanic people mining. So they drop their pans in the water and they get an ounce of gold. And they will name the town. And of course, we recognize them as the founders, and they're from Maine. But really, people were already here working. And a lot of the tools that they used, you know, the arrastras came from Mexico, but also the first year after gold was discovered here in 1850, all of the seasonal rain dried up and there was nothing to get the gold out. And everyone left town by about 15 Mexican miners, and they knew how to get the gold out without water. They would throw up, kind of use a blanket, and they would throw that gold and dirt up into the air and winnow it out, and the heavy pieces would fall down. And of course, you'd lose some of that gold, but it was a way of surviving in a place that's arid and dry. So thank you for exploring the cultures of Colombia with us.
Thank you guys. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing Colombia and for braving the cold and rain for us to see it live. We really appreciate it. I'm throwing up a couple links in our chat. There's one for donations and another to sign up for our newsletter. If you're not on it, make sure you sign up to find out more things going on with the Gaslamp Museum and to find out the link for our next chat, which will be on Saturday, December 5th. It's going to be at 11 a.m. and it'll be on John Spreckles with author Sandra Borna, who just wrote the book Empire Building. So it'll be an interesting chat. I hope you all can join us for it. And if you enjoyed this presentation and our programs, make sure to tell your friends to come join us for the next ones. Thank you very much, Amber and Randy. This was wonderful. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.